Hey everyone, this is Miss Perry. We are going to start out our unit, our notes, with the Enlightenment. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's one of my favorite topics that I get to teach you guys because I graduated from NC State and I studied political science and then got my master's in teaching. But while I was studying political science and government for 4 years, I took 2 classes that were focused pretty much exclusively on the Enlightenment and its thinkers. And so this is just really a topic of interest for me. And I'm so excited to get to start our year with these people. So we are going to look at the Enlightenment and the roots of the Enlightenment. So what was this movement and where did it all come from? Kind of how did it get started? Now, some important things that you need to know about the Enlightenment is that it was a time where many people, many philosophers or people of thought came up with new ideas about government and politics, specifically people's role in government and politics. So where does the common man, where does the normal citizen like me, where did they fit in this government, in their government, their country's government? Are they just a subject to a king that has no rights? Are they someone that just doesn't even matter? Or are they a valued person? Should their voice be heard? Should they have certain rights? And I think you can probably guess where this is going. And so people began to question the need for absolute monarchies. And you probably remember from world history, you may have had a foundation of the Enlightenment that this question of the absolute monarchy and the divine right of monarchs, did they really get all of their power from God? Should we really listen to them? It started during this time. And so the questions of the time were potentially dangerous to who? Who do you think they were dangerous to? Who did they challenge? Well, hopefully you are thinking to yourself that it challenges monarchs. It challenges kings and queens or dictators or whoever is taking too much power for themselves. And so some questions that people started thinking are, can people choose leaders for themselves? Can we vote? Can we elect people rather than just them inheriting the throne through birthright? And are all people created equal? So this is a foundational principle of our Constitution of America, and this started during the Enlightenment. So you're going to see a lot of our core beliefs and values traced back to this time period. All right, so we're going to watch this short video on the Enlightenment.
Well, hey there, and welcome back to Heimler's History. Now, we have finally got to Unit 5 of our AP World History curriculum, and this unit spans the years from 1750 to 1900. Now, the main theme that runs throughout this unit is the massive global changes that occur because of the Industrial Revolution. And in this video, we're going to talk about a new development among the thinky people called the Enlightenment. And in many ways, it was Enlightenment thinking that occasioned the social and political changes that were necessary for the Industrial Revolution. So, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get to it. So, the Enlightenment. Shall we begin with a definition? The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement of the 18th century that advocated the use of reason to reconsider the accepted ideas and social institutions of the time. Or, to put it another way, the scientific revolution and the humanism of the Renaissance got together and had a baby. Oh, look at the baby. Did you poo-poo all over the millennia-long habit of discerning truth through tradition and religious revelation? Yes, you did. Yes, you did. All right, let me just say it plain. The emphasis of the Enlightenment was the application of human reason to natural law. The thinkers during this time began to see that the world and the fullness thereof was ordered by a set of natural laws, and if only we could tap into the wisdom of those natural laws and apply them to our society, then progress would occur. Prior to this, societies understood reality because it was revealed to them by the Bible or by the Quran or by traditions or ancestors. And the big revolution of Enlightenment thought was that we are no longer accepting as true anything that that comes from outside of us. It's the working of our minds and the understanding of the natural laws that will lead us to truth. Now, the contrast I just made is far too simplistic to describe the complex reality of all that, but at least it helps you understand why the Enlightenment was such a big deal. Okay, now let's talk about where all these powerful ideas came from. And we'll start with Francis Bacon and the idea of empiricism. Empiricism is the idea that reality is discerned through the senses, like the sight and the hearing and the smell and the taste and the touch. Therefore, the only way to really know the nature of reality is through the senses. And this idea took the old way of knowing truth and reality and kicked it in the face like a crazed donkey. As I mentioned before, the old way of knowing truth was by revelation, and in the case of Europe, that meant the Bible. The truths in the Bible come to us from outside the world and tell us what reality is like. Empiricism, on the other hand, says that we're going to figure out what reality is like and what it means through our senses and our brain folds. And how are we going to do that? Well, by running scientific experiments to determine what is true and what is false. Also, we've got John Locke making contributions to the political side of things through his book, Two Treatises on Government. He argued that the whole divine right of kings thing was a deeply flawed organization of the political hierarchy. Rather, human beings are endowed with natural rights like life and liberty and property. And those rights are not granted by a king, but by virtue of being a living human being. And as such, it is human beings who ought to have the power in a government. And Locke explained that human beings and their government were in a social contract together. And that just means that if it's true that the power to govern is in the hands of the people, then the social contract means this, that they willingly give up some of that power to a government who is willing to protect their natural rights. And implicit in this agreement is the following, that if the government ends up being a turd, then the people have the right to flush it. Now, one of the consequences of this kind of thinking as applied to politics was revolution. Enlightenment principles like the equality of all human beings led to the breakup of empires and the proliferation of constitutional governments around the world. It also led to a growing nationalism in many places. And just in case you forgot, nationalism is a strong identification of a group of people who share an ethnic identity and a language. You see, prior to this, people tended to be loyal to a ruler or a city. And with this rise of nationalism, people are now loyal to a nation. And this is a big deal because, in case you forgot, Europe had spent centuries building up multi-ethnic empires. And this new nationalistic fervor threatened those empires from every side. All right, let's shift and talk about Enlightenment principles as applied to economics. And for this, I need to introduce you to Adam Smith. In 1776, he published a massively consequential book called The Wealth of Nations, which was his critique of the mercantilist economies of Europe. You see, economics under mercantilism required a heavy hand from the government. Smith, on the other hand, argued for laissez-faire economics, which is French for let alone. So Smith's economic replacement for mercantilism, namely capitalism, was the idea that the government needed to take their hands off and just let things go. Essentially, Smith argued that if individuals were left alone to make their own individual economic choices, then those choices that they make would eventually, being guided by the invisible hand of the market, benefit all of society. Okay, now let's look at how the Enlightenment affected religion. Because of this new way of thinking, people began to re-examine their relationship with God. As you know, Christianity was the dominant religion of the Europeans during this time. If you've ever read the Christian scriptures, you'll know that the God of the Bible often intervenes in history. But the new brand of enlightened religion was called deism. And in deism, the idea was that yes, there was a God and that God created all things in the beginning, but that God does not intervene in history. Rather, God is like a cosmic watchmaker who put all the gears and springs in place, which is to say the natural laws, wound the thing up, and now is letting it tick away without any concern. So, in this system, if you want to know God, then you discover his ways through the contemplation of natural laws. Now, with all of this upheaval and change in thought patterns, you should know that not everyone embraced the Enlightenment's pattern for change. And the people who resisted it were known as conservatives. And conservatism, by definition, is a strong belief in tradition and the shunning of ideology in favor of practical ideas. I'm not going to explain specific conservatives here, but it's enough to know that they existed and that they resisted this revolution of thought. Okay, now let's just talk briefly about some of the long-standing institutions that were affected by Enlightenment thought, namely women and the abolition of slavery. So with all this Enlightenment talk about human beings being invested with natural rights just by virtue of being human beings, the women looked up and said, what about us? Now, if you know anything about world history, you know that pretty much in every society, the outlook on women is pretty bleak. In fact, maybe your good buddy Aristotle can sum up the general view of women in many societies. He thought that a woman...
All right, that's basically what I wanted you to get from that video. So let's move along. So get out a sheet of paper or use your Chromebook. I'm sure that you can pull up a Google Doc. So I want you to take 1 minute and 30 seconds to write on your paper or type on your computer a response to the following. In your own words, describe what life was like before the Enlightenment. If you're stuck, think about who had the power, who didn't have any power, and which groups had more people. So actually, I think you might this might be shown on an ed puzzle. So if this question pops up, you can just answer it on there instead of through your Google Doc. But I'm going to start the timer now. Okay, sorry. So, what factors led to the Enlightenment? You should have gotten something like why people might have been unhappy during the Enlightenment. So, think about like if you are part of the majority of people in a country and you don't have any power, any rights, you're going to look around and say, how is it that 3% or 2%, or if you're living in a monarchy, 1% of the population has all of the power and gets to make all of the decisions, and what I want and what's best for me doesn't even matter. Prior movements that occurred before the Enlightenment, you should have been thinking about that video and how he said the humanism of the Renaissance, the idea that all humans have value and that humans are superior species to animals, and that we have the ability to reason and that our minds are powerful. And the scientific revolution, which said, that we should question traditional ideals and that we should not just give in because of what, leaders say or perhaps even the Bible says. What were the main changes that occurred because of the Enlightenment? Well, if you think about what system of government was like before the Enlightenment, you would say maybe that there were, monarchies or dictatorships. There's a single ruler who kind of has all of the power over the citizens. And then what is our current system of democracy like? And hopefully you're thinking about some things like the fact that everybody has the right to vote, and that if we don't like something that a leader is doing, we have the right to impeach him or get him out of office, because if he's violating the law, no one, not even the president, is above the law. All right. 2, Enlightenment thinkers. So we've talked about the roots of the Enlightenment. What is the general concept? Now let's think about who led this movement, who got it started. All right, this guy is probably my favorite in all of history. He's amazing. His name is John Locke. We actually take his phrase in the Declaration of Independence. And that people are free, equal, and independent, that we are all created equal with natural or inalienable rights. And this is the rights to life, liberty, and property. Obviously, you should remember that in the Declaration, it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They did their own little spin-off of Locke. Excuse me. But Locke believed that property was a fundamental right to people, that if someone could come and just take your property whenever they wanted, that's not freedom, that's not right. And so life, you have the right to a happy, fulfilled, safe life. You have the right to liberty. You have the right to choose what you want to do, who you want to be, and property. And then another one of his big ideas is the social contract, which is also kind of a common idea through almost all of the Enlightenment thinkers, but they all have their own spin on it. And so his idea is that people agree to give up part of their freedom in exchange for protection from the government and natural rights. And so the whole idea that I like to say of the social contract is that I am going to give up my freedom to kill someone if I am mad at them. But in exchange, the government's going to protect me, and I'm not going to be killed if somebody's mad at me. So yeah, it's a pretty good deal. All right, next. This is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, not Jean-Jacques Rousseau. A lot of people mispronounce his name. It is Jean. It's French. He wrote the social contract. So John Locke talks about the social contract in his second treatise of government, which is his most famous book. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau actually wrote a book called The Social Contract. And he says that his most famous quote is, "Man is born free, but everywhere he is found in chains." And I think this is just such a profound quote. Like, wow, we're born all looking the same. We all come out of our, mothers, and we're free. And then all society and government puts all these chains and restrictions on us. And he looked around and he saw large numbers of Europeans living in oppression, and their rights were not being protected. And so he really spearheads this idea of that people have the right to determine how they are ruled. If you are unhappy with government, you have the right to change government. And this is a big idea. Next is Thomas Hobbes. So Hobbes saw humans as naturally selfish and quick to fight. I mean, look at his face, guys. Like, man, he looks like an angry guy. And that's how I remember that Hobbes is so negative. He's got such a negative view of human nature. He says that people are selfish, that they're going to take whatever's best for them, and they're not going to care about anybody else. And he says they're quick to fight. And if we don't have government, people live in something called the state of nature. And this is our base nature, where people are the most selfish and the most impatient. And he says that in our state of nature, people fought all the time to get what they wanted. They only looked out for themselves. And so he is a believer in the social contract, but his is a little bit different. He wrote a book called The Leviathan, and this book explains the ideal government for Hobbes, which is where there is a strong Leviathan, or a strong, almost in modern times, like a dictator. And it's not going to be fun to live in Hobbes, government, but ultimately you give up a lot of your rights, but in return, you're going to get a lot of protection. And so people are going to be okay with this, Hobbes thinks, that because the most important right is safety to Hobbes. And so he says, because of people's base nature, because of their state of nature, because people are so terrible, we have to have a strong dictator or monarch that will kind of protect people's rights. All right. So I want you to answer this question. If Hobbes believed in a Leviathan, a strong dictator or authoritarian leader, why do we classify him as an Enlightenment thinker? How does Hobbes' beliefs still embody that of the Enlightenment? All right. One of my favorite Enlightenment thinkers behind John Locke is Montesquieu. Baron de Montesquieu is amazing because he influences our Constitution. The idea of checks and balances and separation of powers, which is throughout our government. This is like one of the biggest ideas to limit power in our government. It comes from Montesquieu. And so the idea is that checks and balances, the whole premise of checks and balances is that, one government or one branch of government is always going to have power over the other. So separation of powers was where we get our three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. And those three different branches all have different jobs. They have different roles, and they're able to check the power of the other. So think about it, guys. If the president breaks the law, Congress can impeach him. They can get him out of office. If Congress passes a law that violates the Constitution, the Supreme Court can overrule it. So every branch can stop a tyrannical act from the other. And this is the beauty of the Constitution, is we don't have unchecked power. We don't have just tyrants running our government, though, sometimes in modern politics it may feel like it. It's not, it's not true. And so Enlightenment thinkers just believe that God created an orderly universe and that laws govern society. All right. Last but not least is Voltaire. So Voltaire is a big proponent of freedom of religion. So he says that there is no single religion, and you don't have to believe in God to be, fulfilled or complete. Instead, he was very much interested in natural laws that were underlying all religion. So he believed that there were certain laws that people should follow to be good citizens, for society to run well. But and some of those we get from religion, but that you don't have to necessarily believe in God or believe in certain religions um, in order to have those natural, morals, basically. And he considered himself a deist. Remember the idea that God is distant, that he is not involved in life, that he basically creates the world and then sits back and lets it run its course. And so today we get our principle of separation of church and state from him, where we're not going to allow religion to rule our government. Additionally, important to note is that he believed in the freedom of the press. So this was a foundational principle. He believed that censorship was wrong and that government shouldn't prevent people from, being able to publish things that spoke out against them. All right, last discussion break. Most of the Enlightenment thinkers considered themselves to be deist. Deists believe that there is a divine being who created the universe but stays out of human affairs. How does the deist idea of God align with the beliefs/ideology of Enlightenment thinkers of the time? All right. What were some of the important ideas of the philosophers? A philosopher is someone who thinks about things. It's a thinker. And so the philosophers that we just talked about were Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, Voltaire. And these are all, important thinkers of the time. Big ideas to know. So if we were in class, we would do an activity where it would be 4 corners, like, hey, I totally get this, or I understand this term for the most part. I'm a little confused, or I'm totally lost. What does this word even mean? But since we're not in class, I want you to just, answer the question posed on the Ed puzzle for each of these terms. All right. I think that's the end of the presentation. Thanks for bearing with me. I hope this was somewhat interesting. Obviously, it's never going to be the same as being in class, which makes me really sad because I want history to be fun for you and I want to make class and learning engaging, but we will return to class one day. I am confident. And so I just really appreciate your engagement during this time.